Our speaker today, this afternoon, is Gallardo of the University of Barcelona, on taking evil into the lab, exploring the frontiers of morality and individual differences.
Thank you very much, Ralph. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. In the following minutes, I will try to show you how we have taken evil into the lab in spite of the ethical concerns that came up after that infamous experiments from the 50s through the 70s. In other words, in spite of the IRBs. Let's talk a little bit about where I come from. I come from Barcelona, from northeastern Spain, close to the border with France in southern Europe. And this is the main building of our university. I just wanted to show you where I come from because, I mean, it's always another way of visiting or traveling around the world. But anyway, it's more than 500 years old university, although we only have one Nobel Prize. So that's a pity. Should you have to want more information, you can visit our website. There is a link right there in which you can get all the content in English, so just your Spanish wouldn't be good enough. But let's see more in depth the contents of the presentation. First of all, I'm gonna show you some basics, some foundations of our project. I'm gonna proceed making a brief description of the project, a very brief overview of the methods and the key questions that we are going to address. Later on, I'm going to focus more strictly on the individual differences that we're going to look at and how are we going to study moral behavior. Later on, I'll show you one of our experiments. I've precisely selected this one because it's the most spectacular, because it's one of the most renowned experiments across psychology's history. But it's not the only one. I also have to admit that we haven't collected any data yet, so I won't be able to show you that data next year. I expect to bring you all the data, and as Vipke said, to bring you tons and lots of tables and interpretations and all that stuff. And finally, I will show you what do we expect for the next year? So what's coming, future lines of research, what's the data strategy, what's the data analysis strategy that we are going to adopt, and so forth. So if we have a look at those three pictures, I'm pretty sure, I would bet $500 that you all know to which experiment they correspond, each one. So this is the milligrams, sorry, this is the ash, my fault. This is that was my fault. This is the Ash social conformity. This is the Milgram's experiment, and this is Zimbardo's prison experiment. These experiments shift the scenery in social psychology and in personality psychology, and actually changed the course of history of psychology, because these experiments from the results of these experiments, many extreme situations have been claimed to be the cause of extreme behaviors as well. Even recently, some atrocities have been explained in the light of the results of those experiments. For instance, what happened in Abu Ghraib was explained. If you remember Zimbardo's book, The Lucifer Effect, it was explained in the light of their experiments, in the light of their results with regard to the prisons. The question, though, is, I mean, these guys, these soldiers, were named as the 7 bad apples. The question, though, is why a bad apple becomes bad? Is it because it's bad or becomes bad somehow? We don't know. We don't know yet. So there are many, and one of the goals of this project precisely is to try to understand what's going on here. However, I forgot to mention that in previous experiments, or in the results of that previous experiments, have gone down in history as a supreme demonstration that situation can be powerful or so powerful enough to extinguish individual differences in the responses of individuals in front of a given situation. However, it is often dismissed the fact that if we look at raw data, only 64% of participants in the original Milgram experiment actually obeyed and actually kept going, delivering shocks until the end of the experiment. What is more surprising is that in Ash experiment, only 30% of the people conformed, regardless of social pressure. However, we still think that social pressure or social influence is that powerful that it can make us behave in a way wherever it be. The thing is, why all these people and why all these people here did not obey, did not conform? We don't know yet. Milgram himself, in the lunchtime I was talking to someone about this, Milgram himself, in the appendix of his famous book, thought or believed that there should be some individual differences that may explain this bunch of people, but he didn't find any significant difference. He didn't find any valuable variable that could explain that. But let's move on a little bit. Keep in mind these figures just for a while. I mean, this is almost 2/3 of the sample. This is 1/3 roughly. This is 2/3, and this is another 2/3. Surprisingly, these figures doesn't seem to be distributed at random. Precisely yesterday, I'm unable to remind the talk in which the presenter talked about this, but some tasks, some moral-related tasks were shown, and some data indicated roughly the same figures. I'm going to show you one example, one natural experiment related to moral behavior in a way, to civic behavior more specifically. This is a very elegant example of a natural experiment conducted in the Netherlands. More specifically, in Groningen, there is an anti-litter norm by means of which if you litter and you get caught, you can be seriously fined. These researchers took advantage of a public surveillance system, and they designed this experiment. This is an alley close to a shopping area where usually bikes are parked. There is a clear graffiti forbidden sign right there. And as you can see, the floor is quite clean. There's no litter on it. The walls are clean. These authors, what they did was to leave a flyer in each of the bikes, and since there are no trash bins around, the only way to deal with them is or just either littering or carrying along with them. In this clean environment, only 1/3 of the sample littered the flyers, while 2/3 of the sample carried along and littered at home. More later on, you can imagine to where I'm going. Later on, the authors purposely littered the street, purposely painted on the walls, and see what happened if they leave flyers on the bikes. Not surprisingly, 69%, almost 70% of the sample littered the flyers, while 1/3, almost 1/3 of the sample did not litter that flyers. So these figures roughly correspond to what I've shown you, and it seems to happen that 1/3 of the population or 1/3 of the sample turns out to behave more morally or in a moral way Another third seems to systematically behave in an immoral way. And the mean third may be turning around and behaving according to the situation. So that's just to exemplify how it would work. But the thing is that why there are some people that violate norms, that break them, whereas other people conform norms, OB don't violate them. Are there individual differences? We still don't know. Is it a situation? We still don't know. The thing, my point of view is that there are individual differences that may predict this. However, personality has been often discredited because of that infamous Michel personality coefficient, correlation coefficient of 0.3. But if we look at the average correlation between situation behavior and behavior, it's not that high. That means that situation doesn't outperform personality or individual differences when predicting actual behavior. So my guess is that there is truth on both sides of the history. Let's move on a little bit because it is quite obvious, or at least to me, it's obvious to me, that personality has ubiquitous and important consequential outcomes, such as very influential reviews have shown. For instance, with regard to psychopathology, with regard to happiness, with regard even workplace performance. So why not such a complex behavior like moral behavior? So there must be individual differences related to them. But let's talk a little bit about the antecedents of this specific design of this specific project. In 2006, well, actually early in 2000s, Mel Slater is a computer scientist interested in how machines interact with human beings, or the other way around. I mean, he's basically interested in how human beings interact with virtual realities, with virtual world settings, and all that stuff. The thing is that from the 2000, he was systematically rejected in some major grants because so many reviewers told him that, okay, that's pretty nice, that seems a very good built video game, but it lacks ecological validity, blah, 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 blah. Ecological validity is an important concept. Ecological validity is an important concept because for those of you who are not familiar with, ecological validity is something that makes that our experiments can be generalized to real world life. So it turned out to be that one of these criticisms was a rejection of a major grant. So in order to avoid future rejections and future reviewers' comments, he tried to design one of the most extreme situations ever performed in a lab, which was the Milgram's experiment. But just to see whether people would respond realistically or not. They even electrophysiologically recorded participants' skin conductance, heart rate, and all these variables. And they found that when respondents had to deliver a shock to a virtual avatar, to that lady here, their heart rate increased, their skin conductance increased, so they were really suffering for inflicting pain to a virtual avatar. So that was really surprising. I have to say that the dropping out ratio of this experiment was not that high as you may expect. Roughly, it's the same that in the original Milgram study. So 2/3, around 70%, roughly, of the sample keep on kept on delivering shocks while just 30% dropped out of the experiment. But I was pretty shocked because when I not electrically shocked, because when I read the original article in the methods, when I was reading the methods section, I realized that they applied the Neo FFI, which is a short measure of the 5-factor model. So for the very first time, there was a paper showing data on personality and milligrams, even it was virtual, and milligrams staff. I asked him whether he had analyzed this data with regard to dropping out ratio, and his answer was no, we didn't. Then I kindly asked him, can I have a look at your data, please, please, please? The answer was, here is my data. So when we separated participants between those who dropped out of the experiment, which are in blue, and those who continue it up to the end, which are in green, and we look whether there were significant differences in personality score, in mean personality scores, we found, and this is neuroticism, extroversion, openness, agreeableness, and conscientiousness. We found that conscientious individuals, responsible, industrious, they keep adhere to their moral principles, were more likely to drop out of the experiment and not inflict pain on that virtual avatar. These are very preliminary data. It's just with 30 people, which is not very generalizable, but it gives us the flavor of where things are going. So basically, the purpose of this project is look at whether there are individual differences that may predict whether people behave morally or immorally in a given situation, and what are they if so. So more formally, we are going to address 5 questions, the 5 key questions, which are whether there are reliable and meaningful individual differences in the disposition to think, feel, and act in morally ways. We think so we'll see next year what's going to happen. Whether there is evidence, including consistency, for the existence of character traits. Since we are going to perform 3 different experiments, related, all 3 with moral behavior, we can expect some kind of consistency across situations. We'll also see whether they can be better conceptualized as part of the big 5 or as a more narrow trait, since we are looking both at general models and more specific models. What is the best way to define situations in the first place in order to define them and so forth? The thing here is that in order to capture similarities across situations, rather than looking at objective traits of these situations, we'll be looking at individuals' appraisals of these situations. So how individuals, how participants feel in that situation. And we expect to find relationships between both. And finally, I think this is the most fancy feature of our project. What new or all methods, analytic techniques can be best used to reach breakthroughs in the study of the character? We're relying on several pillars: virtual reality, neuro imaging, genetics, new personality or modern personality questionnaires, and so forth. So I expect that this is pretty new. Virtual reality. There are not many virtual reality experiments in personality-related fields, neither on social psychology. So I think it's worth having a look at it. So what are our targets? What are we going to look at? We're going to look at genetics. We're going to look at neuroimaging, temperamental data, broad personality data, character data, intelligence, situational appraisal. I'm gonna quickly review the methods section. So I'm going to not extensively focus on them. But if you have questions regarding this, I'll be happy to answer after the presentation. So feel free to ask wherever you want. And finally, sorry, behavior in virtual scenarios. So let's start from genetics. We're gonna have a look at 4 genes: the MAOA gene, which was previously related to antisocial behavior, the serotonin transporter gene, which has been related to many outcomes. The VRD4 gene, which has been related to exploration, impulsivity, sensation seeking, and the CANNAL2 gene, which has been recently related to conscientiousness, to trait conscientiousness. So this is a neurodevelopmental related gene that seems to have something to do with maturation and all that stuff. So it's pretty complex, but we don't have time to discuss about it. Participants will also undergo a complete neuroimaging protocol that includes structural neuroimaging, functional neuroimaging, and also diffusion tensor imaging, which is a DTI, which is a recent development, just to track connections or connectivity between different areas of the brain, because we usually regard only at the volume of that part of the brain, the activity of that part of the brain, but we don't know quite a lot about, for instance, how the amygdala might be connected to frontal lobe. So I think it's worth having a look at it. So I'm gonna very quickly review this. I mean, we'll have a look at impulsivity, aggressiveness, temperamental traits, broad personality traits such as the Big Five or 5-factor model, character data, the classics, social dominance, orientation scale, authoritarianism, values, personal goals, attitudes, empathy, empathic concern, and perspective taking, and so forth. Intelligence, we'll also have a look at intelligence. We will apply the Robbins progressive matrices. Just to have a look at the cognitive functioning of individuals, because it's often dismissed as well. And life history as well, because childhood victimization, for instance, may influence how we react. For instance, a history of physical abuse, a history of sexual abuse. So it's a very complete bunch of questionnaires. And finally, situational appraisal, in which we will apply the golden standard for situational assessment. So, but from now on, so let's gonna focus on the most interesting part of the project. I will try to show you what we've done so far. Take my word, it's really hard to make you feel as the participants feel. So it's not like playing a video game. It's somewhat more tricky. If you are interested, I can explain you later on. But I'm going to show you the cave, the apparatus, and some samples. This is the Faculty of Psychology, and the cave is within this building. A cave is basically, cave stands for Cave Automated Virtual Environment. And it's basically 3 walls and a floor in which we project the images that the participants will see. It also stands for Plato's Cave in the Republic with regard to metaphors, illusion, perception, and all that stuff. Basically, this is our cave. So it's a gray it's 3 gray walls with a gray floor, in which we project several images. So these are the desktops of 4 different computers. And this is our shock generator, which resembles pretty much the shock generator built by Milgram for his experiment. This is another view of the shock generator with the selectors of the intensity, the button to deliver the shock, and the multimeter that shows the intensity of the. This is to make it somewhat more realistic. So they are really touching something, and they think, and subjects think that they are actually doing something. These are the goggles that subjects wear when they are facing this experiment. They don't have any secret, so they are just if you have attended any 3D, if you have stared at any 3D movie in a cinema, it's exactly the same. So it's polarized goggles, so it has no secret. And this is the experimental set. In this experimental set, we have a room with a virtual avatar here and the shock generator here. This is another view of the scenario, and this is the console used by the controller to make the situation somewhat more interactive, in order to gain plausibility, in order to make participants believe that they are really. I mean, at some points of the experiment, there is some variation, and the participants may interact some way with that virtual avatar. So that makes the illusion even more real if possible. This is a closer view of these are some buttons with some sentences that the controller may trigger. And now I'm going to show you, well, this is the basic situation of the experiment. This is the experimenter, the avatar, and the participant. So it sits just in front of him. And now I'm going to show you 3 different videos, then 2 more videos. In the following 3 videos, we'll see 1 light shock, 1 strongest shock, and the 3 last shocks of the experiment, in which the avatar remains unconscious. He loses his mind, so you'll see it in a while. So this is the first video. But since it's quite slight, I mean, there is no effect on the avatar. On the following sample, we'll see a strongest shock. I want to go out, says the avatar. And finally, the 3 last shocks. So the experiment is over. Later on, there is a debriefing. And we explain that this was a fake, that he didn't suffer. But what happens if the participant has a doubt? I mean, he can ask the. I'm going to take 3 or 4, 5 minutes if you don't mind. What's going to happen if the participant has a doubt and asks the experimenter what shall she do? We have 2 possibilities. He or she can continue, or she or he can drop out. So let's see a kind of example. And then we stop the experiment right here. So she or he can leave whenever he wants, whenever she wants. It isn't the only experiment that we're conducting. We're conducting another experiment, which is a moral choice, in which participants have to choose between killing 1 virtual avatar by shooting him with a gun, or let 5 people die in hands of that guy. Also, we're going to conduct a social conformity experiment within the scanner while we were recording brain activity. So these are our 3 measures of actual behavior. So basically, this is not a comprehensive model. Rather, is an outline of what we intend to do next year. Basically, we will try to predict behavior in experimental settings using situational appraisal, using life history, individual differences and also genetics and brain function that may influence these individual differences. So all in all, these kind of experiments offer brand new directions and very fresh situations that can be easily manipulated. We can combine experimental designs with correlational designs, explore other situations, for instance, the bystander effect in a bar fight situation. There's a lot of stuff to do in the future if we find something interesting. So finally, I would like to thank you, the members of my team, Mel Slater, Veronica Benet, and Alberto. I also would like to thank field researchers, Paulo, Lisa, and especially Leo, Carlos, and Monsan as well, but also our research assistants. Not to say that without the support of the Wake Forest University Descartes project and the generous grant of the John Templeton Foundation, that wouldn't be possible. This is my wonderful team, and I'm really happy to answer your questions. So thank you very much.
I have a question on framing obedience to authority, or in the trolley dilemma, as moral. I mean, clearly the outcomes, harm, is moral, but what's interesting about those situations, and I think what makes it hard to label one behavior as another moral, is they're conflicting moral motivations, right? Authority, it should be a good experiment. I mean, it's not actually harming anyone, it's an avatar versus, moral emotions like empathy. I mean, I had a hard time just watching those videos. So I guess I'm curious about picking these particular kinds of situations where, and then also just framing them as a moral behavior or not, because I have a hard time labeling obedience in an experiment. I mean, in some ways you could see that as the moral choice. So, and the trolley dilemma is the same kind of thing. Which behavior choice is particularly moral or immoral?
Well, first of all, I have to say that we're not looking at obedience, actually. Okay. Because we are not telling people to do something against her will or against their will. So they just simply can drop out of the experiment whenever they want. What we can consider moral or immoral is to keep on delivering pain or inflicting pain even when you know that he might be suffering. So
I guess, but the other argument would be that you signed up to follow a professor and research to the extent that it's legitimate, and to not follow his instructions could be a moral violation, considering this is not a real person, especially. So I guess, to the extent that authority, being authority or being conscientious, you could imagine the opposite framing in terms of which behavior is actually the right way to behave. Which I guess it's just an interesting question to consider. I don't think there's one answer, but I think I would say it's an interesting domain in which to study morality, because there are conflicting motivations.
Yeah, actually, the experiment in which the moral conflict is more evident is the moral choice. So this would be the more in which the moral framework would be more evident. I think in the case of Milgram, it is not that morality. I mean, it is not that going up to the end is moral or not. Rather, it is okay. You are inflicting pain, and you are doing something that you know that's wrong. So, is it moral or not? So that's I think that this is our argument. But I mean, we can discuss later on if you want.
So we have just about 4 minutes for more questions. So then follow-ups.
Okay, it's just, I mean, one of the things I find, it's very interesting how people do have these effective responses in virtual reality situations. My worry is that if you're interested in trying to figure out the people who don't conform, what makes people disobey or not do things, then the fact that you're not framing it as an obedience experiment is kind of problematic, because surely what we want to know from the original Milgram experiments is the people who disobeyed, what made them different. So if you take away the factor of this being obedience, you've lost, it seems to me that you've kind of lost one of the main things that tells us the difference between the people who obey and disobey. Do you see what I'm interested in?
I'm not sure.
Okay, because it sounded like the aim of your project was to try and get at, hopefully, the individual factors that distinguish those who carry out form or carry out orders from those who do not. But you just said that you framed your Milgram experiment in such a way that it's no longer
obedience.
Yeah, so you're no longer really testing.
We're not testing obedience, but rather we're testing. We're testing how to say whether inflicting pain is moral or not. So that
seems sort of like a different question, though.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's not exactly the same experiment that Milgram did, of course.
Yeah.
The thing is that what would happen, for instance, if we had a virtual experimenter? Then we could be studying obedience to a virtual avatar.
Okay.
But yeah, in a way you're somewhat. I mean, I understand your concerns, but I don't think that obedience is. I don't think that obedience is that immoral. So actually, we have two competing hypotheses with regard to why some subjects keep up to the end of the experiment and why some participants drop out, which we call the good guy. I mean, in an obedience setting, well, not an obedience. In a situation like this, someone may go up to the end because he's a really obedient guy. He's very conscientious, or rather, he can simply keep on delivering shocks because he's a kind of psychopath. He enjoys inflicting pain to a virtual avatar. So I mean, we don't have any a priori hypothesis on what's going on. This is very exploratory. I mean, when we ask for the project, we make it very clear that it was completely exploratory because we didn't have any idea. So suggestions will be welcome.
Was there another early hand over here?
Yes. So this was all really fascinating and raises a lot of questions. One question that I'm curious about is the connection between the neuro imaging work that you're doing and the work in the virtual worlds. So I could imagine it being really interesting to show people the avatars that they've hurt or that they've saved while they're in the scanner and see if there are differences in people's emotional reactivity or whatever things you could measure. And I'm curious if there is.
We cannot currently perform brain scanners in the cave.
But if you could, after the fact, show them images of, say, the avatar.
The problem, I mean, there are two different issues here. If we look at structural neuroimaging, it's easy to relate because in general, unless you have a head trauma or something like this, your brain structure won't gonna change, and you can relate with another task. The thing is, when we look at functional neuroimaging, we can only look at the task. We can only relate it to the task that we are conducting. So we cannot currently conduct this in the scanner. But we're going to conduct the social conformity. So we expect, for instance, what happened. I mean, if we find an activation of the amygdala when I'm just guessing, okay. But if we find an activation of the amygdala while conducting this task, then there may be biological basis related to emotionality that for sure has to be related with emotional conflicts that may experience people undertaking these experiments. So that's how we are going to relate brain function or brain structure and social conformity. Or we also plan to, but we'll see whether we can do it finally or not. That wasn't intended in the original project, but we also conduct ERP, event-related potentials, because they can be recorded within the cave. So we have the equipment. So we'll see what's going on.
So I think this is fascinating. The one question I have is about the transparency of the procedure for the subjects. About the transparency of the procedure for the subjects. Because in the original Milgram experiment, they were told that this is about the learner's behaviour. So I guess I'm just wondering, in the absence of a real learner, is it more transparent to the subjects that this is actually all about what they're doing and that we're interested in?
What we're telling them is that is an experience of machine learning of automatized learning. So we kind of lie them about this. Okay. But when we finish the experiment, obviously we debrief them.
Did you have another?
Yeah, I did. I just had a quick question for you about the relationship between conscientiousness and the choice to drop out, because the finding was that those who dropped out were higher in conscientiousness,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Which, I think there are reasons for that, and I'd like to know why. Because the alternative seems equally plausible, which
Yeah.
is if you watch the Milgram experiment, one of the things people who don't drop out say is, I had a job to do, they were paying me to be here, and I was going to do what I was supposed to do, which to me sounds like a very conscientious approach to the task. So.
I absolutely agree. So that's why we have two competing hypotheses. The good guy, which this is an example of a good guy that he's doing this for because he has a goal and he's doing his job, and the rebel guy, who will be probably lower in conscientiousness, lower in agreeableness, probably a little bit more extroverted, maybe somewhat more neurotic.
But is there some feature of conscientiousness that you think is driving that, assuming you get that effect again,
Yeah.
you think is driving that?
Yeah, I think so.
I could imagine that it was always a woman in that case, so conscientiousness carries also being traditional, right? And you don't like hurt a woman. So you can do that with a guy on the shares, he's not behaving well.
Yeah,
Maybe that's
it may be.
But on the other hand, it was only 30 people, right?
Yeah, so we cannot make big generalizations about this, but it sounds pretty well, preliminary speaking.
Was that your question?
No. So okay, so yeah, I think for me it felt watching that video really scary, because when the guy started to interact with you, I thought, ugh, that's odd. And I think I would have dropped out for that reason, because to me it was very scary. And are you controlling for experiences with virtual reality? Because people who play World of Warcraft all the time, right? They are used to that feeling. But for me it felt so odd. It was really. I don't want to talk to that computer guy anymore.
There are a couple of things here. If you are around 30 or over 30, it does matter. I mean, if you're
I'm in that age.
I mean, your previous experience matters on how you can empathize in this virtual world and this reality. So the more you have played with video games and Warcraft and first-person shooting games and all that stuff, the less likely you are to feel empathetic with this character. If you are below 25 or around 25 or less, it doesn't really matter, because they really feel as if they were there. And the thing is that
how does that come? Are they out stupid? Do you remember that?
No, but they are so used to they are so used to play with things, to have gadgets and all that stuff, that they don't discriminate. Yeah.
Well, I hate to do this, but because there are hands up, I mean several.
Sorry.
But I think we have to probably stop.
Thank you.